Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I'm Kristen, and I go over those true stories every week that always involve at least one miracle. So I think we should just get right into it. I did want to say I've been kind of adding it in the description, but I figured, well, new year. As I try to grow my channel, a few people have mentioned that I should add a, PayPal or something in case anybody should ever want to give. Obviously, I don't like asking for that or anything like that, but just so people know and are aware. And so that's in the description. Other than that, also, check this out. Has nothing to do with the story. I'm just excited. It's my first time to wear it. It's got the little thumb hole. I get excited about little things. Sorry. Anyway, it's cool. Old Navy, in case you want to know. All right. Story. Our story begins September 18th, 1971. And a man named Art Walters, he had gotten up out of bed, usual routine, and he always started his days on his knees in prayer. Reason being is that he says that God saved him from a life of addiction to alcohol and drugs. And so that was just one of his things that he did every morning. And at this point in time, he had been married for about 2 years to a woman named Vicky. And together, the two of them had a passion for helping people on the streets, especially ones that also suffered with addictions. They eventually made a halfway house, and it was called Casa de Vida. It was located in Santa Barbara, California, and they just helped with the homeless, with people with addictions. They thought that was a great start and a great thing to do. So the two of them, that was their passion. Now, residents of people in the halfway house, Casa de Vida, they did a bunch of odd jobs in the community, little repairs here and there, landscaping, things like that to, help them get back on their feet and to have money to make ends meet. Art was going to be supervising some of these odd jobs for that morning, September 18th. And before he got his day started in his prayer time, he actually talked with God and he asked God, would you take anything out of my life that could tempt me to go back to my former life of addiction? He just told God, rid me of everything that could any, shape, way, or form put me back where I was. Never want to go back. So he went out the front door to begin his day, and it was beautiful blue skies, great weather, perfect for working outdoors. And his first task of the day would be helping one of the local residents in the halfway house by the name of Bud. Bud was going to be working at a local motel, doing some odd jobs there, and Art was going to just supervise and help if need be. And this motel, it was actually going under renovations or remodeling, and the manager was actually going to give the halfway house a 15-foot TV antenna. Again, this is 71, not the technology we have nowadays, but this was great. I mean, anything donated, especially like that and that expensive, would be great for the halfway house. The only problem was they'd have to be able to take it down off the roof and get it down on their own. But they thought, this is a great opportunity. We could use this. So Art and Bud were going to go up to the roof and try to do this. So they got a big step ladder, made their way to the roof, and they began to go to work. Now, the antenna itself, it was attached to a long pole that actually fit into another long pole that went into the ground. So the two of them were going to have to lift that top heavy pole up out of the first one and then, of course, get it down safely to the ground. So they both took a good grip, lifted, and the top pole came free. However, one little issue, it was so heavy. And not only was it so heavy, the weight, the distribution was not equal. So it was way off. So when they lifted it, it was like teetering, and they were doing everything they could to hold on and keep a grip. so that this thing wouldn't topple over. Well, of course, the pole begins to tilt and Bud yells out, "I don't have it." And that's when the antenna fell into a cluster of high voltage wires. Those wires happened to be close to the motel. And as it toppled, the impact broke through the wires, sending the live ends falling onto the roof. Now, there were two another word. I don't know. Another one I had trouble with. Cylindrical. Oh my gosh, I did it. Two cylindrical transformers. Those things exploded. And of course, sparks went flying onto the rooftop. And then traveling down that pole was a big ball of fire, and it engulfed both Art and Bud. So as the flames are all over the both of them, the force of this blast and everything threw both the men like rag dolls. And when Art landed, he was knocked out. And mind you, his clothes are still on fire. He last remembers holding onto the pole and then blacking out. Art thinks he's dead at this point, and he says, even though he was blacked out, that he says, "I was still awake and aware. I just couldn't see anything. It was all dark." And he says, Art said, that's when all of a sudden a cool wind just came over his face. And it was almost like as if you turned a fan on really gently and it just started to blow. He says he looks to his left and he begins to see in the distance a form coming towards him. And he knew right away someone was coming for him. And he said that it looked like you were looking through binoculars. And you know how when you're trying to put them into focus, so it's kind of blurry, coming in and out? That's how it looked. He says the next thing he notices, he saw his body. He was looking down at himself, and he says he saw his body, he was knocked out, and he was just laying there on the roof, and his body was all burned and charred. He said after looking down, seeing himself laying there, he then looks back up and to his right. And he said there was a huge chest of a man. And it was from like the neck down to his hands that he could see. And it was huge and it was right there as he turned to the right. And he says, immediately I knew I was in the presence of the Almighty God. He said the chest itself took up the whole sky. And I mean, of course, you couldn't see a face. It was just the chest part with the hands kind of down to the waist. And it was just enveloping everything in the air. He says the hands then began to go down and scoop up his body. It held him for a few seconds and then laid him gently back down. Art says that when he was placed down, that's when Art woke up, became conscious again. And as soon as he woke up, he stood up on his feet. And he was shocked to see that he was now on the ground. And surrounding him were a ton of EMTs and firefighters. He took one look down at his own body as he's standing there, saw how burned and charred and messed up it looked, and immediately he passes back out. Now, going back to Bud, when this explosion happened, he was also thrown like a rag doll, remember? But it did not knock him unconscious. When he got back up, he saw over the way, there was Art laying there unconscious. And like we said earlier, Bud just thought Art was already dead. And right there, not too far, were a ton of little wires just dancing and flailing about on top of the roof, live wires. And Bud just knew, if I don't get off of here and get off now, I'm going to be next. I'm not going to make it. Those wires are going to hit me, catch me on fire. Now, Bud was a believer. He had a relationship with God, but it was pretty new. It hadn't been that long since he'd been a believer. But in that moment, he had nothing else he could do. He cried out. He said, "Jesus." And immediately, Bud feels a surge of energy come out of nowhere into his body. And he began to go over to Art and pat out all the flames. And mind you, Bud had 30% burns on his body too. Wasn't near as bad as Art, but still, that surge came out of nowhere and he began patting out what was all over Art. And after he patted all that out, he still had that burst of energy to pull his friend to the edge of the roof. But how was he going to get him down? So he begins to travel down the ladder by himself, thinking, how am I going to do it? How am I going to get him off of there? Because those live wires are still up there. So he gets down off the ladder, steps onto the ground. As he's thinking, how am I going to do this? He looks up, and standing on top of the roof is a man. This stuns Bud, and he's like, who the heck is that? And the man standing there happened to be holding a limp body, which was Art. He helped hand down Art's body to Bud, who helped climb back up the stepladder a bit. And the two of them, the man on the roof handing down, and then Bud was able to get Art down safely the rest of the way. And once he got down the ladder with Art, put him down, he looks back up, and the man's gone. Nowhere to be found. And in time, after all this would pass, Bud would actually tell Art, I am most sure that that was an angel of God that handed your body down to me. Now, once the EMTs did arrive on the scene that day, they pronounced Art dead on the scene. And they said that by the looks of it, he had probably been dead about 10 minutes. Second and third degree burns covered Art's body. 70% of his body was just charred and burnt. And Bud just stood there looking. He was so upset. And he just prayed, please, Jesus, please don't let him die. Then something amazing happens. That is when Art got up off the stretcher and stood up. And he says it was like something or someone helped him. It was like helped lift him up off and to his feet that day. And of course, as we said earlier, that's when he looks down, sees his body, and he passes out again. And EMTs go to work doing their thing because they're stunned. He was dead for 10 minutes. So they're like, what in the world? So now they're trying to revive him, make sure he's good. And as the EMTs are working, many are grabbing ice from the motel to pack around Art's body to cool it down. And they said that on the ride in the ambulance to the hospital, Art actually died 5 more times. His heart stopped. But they were able, thank goodness, to revive him each time. Over these next 3 weeks, as Art's starting to recover, the pain was unbearable. And for those that have ever had a bad burn, whether it's one or many that are second degree, you know how horrific that pain actually is. And remember, there's 70% of these burns on his body. So he said he can't even describe. The pain was unbearable. And he was kind of out of it. They didn't say if he was in a medically induced coma, but usually in these situations, I believe they are. So he probably was. I'm not sure, but I know he wasn't conscious because he says that he remembers the conversations the doctors had with his wife, Vicky. And they said, look, he's probably not going to wake up. I mean, he's got so much going against him, risk of infection because of those open wounds that could kill him at any moment. If it's not that, it can be the exhaustion because your body can only take so much. So it might just wear out from exhaustion from the pain and the wounds. And if it's not that, then it could be the fluid loss that kills him because of losing all those fluids from the burns. Your body can't obviously live without water. So this is looking not good, guys. And he's telling this to Vicky, and he's hearing this, even though he's not conscious at the time. The doctors also said the slim margin that Art does pull through, he's probably going to be paralyzed, never walk again, and or brain damaged. So this is not looking great. His main doctor was a British doctor by the name of Dr. John Chappell, and he had come in to take a look at Art's face. And Art had so much facial damage that Dr. Chappell told Vicky he's going to need immediate surgery in the morning because of this. And so as Art is hearing these things and these conversations, he cries out to God. And he says he cried out and said, "What are you doing to me?" And he says, God answered him immediately, and he made Art a promise. And he said, God to Art says, I can heal you completely, but would you be willing to carry these scars for my glory as a testimony to what I can do? Well, Art agreed, but even though he agreed, he wasn't quite sure what that meant. what his future was going to look like. And he said that God also told him in that moment that he would heal his face from any scarring as a sign to others that would see him. No scarring here. I mean, he'd have the body scars, but his face would be okay. And anyway, the next morning comes. They're going to get him ready for surgery. Dr. Chappell walks in and he's stunned. Another stunned situation here because he takes one look to analyze Art's face, and he just can't believe how much healing occurred overnight. So much so, immediate surgery no longer needed. Of course, the surgery was canceled. Now, the rest of Art's body, like I said, it's still in very bad shape. And each day the nurses came in to change his bandages. That was the most excruciating part of his day. And I mean, he says it was just almost unbearable. He said he would scream in pain anytime they changed a bandage, and this had to happen each day. He says he couldn't even eat or drink anything because of the pain in his body, not just from the bandages, but the constant pain from the burns. He just couldn't drink or eat. Doctors said his recovery probably be at least 3 months in the hospital. And during that time, even though the bandage changes were horrific, he said there was one bright part of his day every day. One particular nurse would come in every day and she would read him scripture. And that kind of gave Art the extra oomph to keep on going, to never give up, even though he wanted to because of the pain. Many weeks go by, and one day, Art's looking towards the door of his hospital room he's in, and he sees something greenish, like a light, smoke-looking greenish, it said. And he said it started to seep into his room. Well, right off the bat, he thinks it's a fire, so he goes into panic mode. He's terrified, especially after what he just went through. But soon thereafter, he notices, oh gosh, it's not a fire. It's an actual evil spirit. Art then says he began to hear a voice in his head, and it kept asking him, don't you want all the pain to be gone? It can be gone like that. Now, Art's right arm was burned from his pit level all the way to the tips of his fingers. So it was in really bad shape. But despite that, he said that an unseen force started to push his hand. There happened to be, how to describe this here? There happened to be some scissors on the little nightstand or tray area. Why, I don't know, but they were there. And he said this evil, unseen spirit started pushing his hand to pick up the scissors and then go towards his own body with them. And that's when Art couldn't do anything but pray. And he began to pray constantly, as hard as he could. And he said immediately that's when another unseen force was pushing Art's hand the opposite direction with the scissors. Art knew that other unseen force was 100% the Holy Spirit. He says this was definitely a spiritual battle taking place right in front of him. He says then light began to fill the whole room he was in. He looks down towards the end of his bed and he sees Jesus. He said his smile was radiant and glowing and beautiful. And he said in that moment, right after seeing him, he immediately went to sleep. Now, sleep was something he hadn't done because of the horrific pain from the burns. So it did not come easy the whole time thus far. But Jesus put him to sleep just like that. Real calm, quick, peaceful. And the nurses actually come in the room the next morning and they're stunned to see Art sleeping so peacefully because they know he hadn't slept in the last several weeks because of the pain. And when they began to change his bandages that day after he woke up, Art says it was completely painless. He says from that point on, the pain, it was there, but it was manageable. It wasn't horrific and terrible like it had been. And he said that, through the time and the surgeries he had to have for the burns, he said they became more successful than previous ones had been. So pain was better, more successful surgeries. And wouldn't you know it, 2 weeks after that point, Art was able to leave the hospital. So there was no 3 months about it. Now, Bud, he also overcame all his injuries. And over time, unfortunately, like life is for a lot of us, Bud and Art lost touch with each other, but they never forgot that day that someone, an angel, was it Jesus? We don't know, handed Art's body down safely to Bud that day. And then the miracles just took off from there. To this day, his wife Vicky can't see one iota of a scar on his face. On his body, yes, obviously, but face, almost like nothing had ever happened. The two of them, they work full-time as missionaries in Central America, and they occasionally also do missionary work with other churches in the U.S. and ministries and whatnot. I mean, how did you like that story, guys? That was amazing. And a little longer than, most of my stories are, but golly, I had to tell all the details in this one because, that's miraculous right there. What do you guys think about this story? Do you guys think, I know we say this a lot, was it an angel? Or do you think it could have been Jesus or what? I just find it fascinating, like pondering those things. And it's just so cool to me. Just remember, guys, if you like these stories, to like and subscribe, because that gets the channel out there going and more people seeing it. And other than that, I am going to see you guys for the next one.